actually did not make that title up. Everybody gave it to me. Right, Ange? No?
Sure,
Okay,
yeah.
perfect. Perfect. But, you know, really what it is around strategy and how do we create culture, how do we create brand, and that's really what a lot of things I've worked on. And I think it's important to ground us in, especially if we're talking about talent brand compared to branding. And I think, for some of you that might be newer to the industry, what often gets confusing is the difference between advertising and marketing. And I wanted to ground us in what I think is the most easy way to describe what brand is. And this is the best thing out there. And I think advertising is telling, and this is related to dating, right? But advertising is telling people you're single. Marketing is asking someone out, and brand is the reason they say yes. And I think that's a very important analogy because branding can often get confused with, I spent money on this advertising, I spent money on this project, I spent money on an email marketing campaign. That isn't talent branding. That's going out and trying to get people to see your brand. And, then if we add another layer onto this, we're talking about employer brand, right? So there's the consumer brand where the communication primarily exists to sell the products, and the employer brand, which is based on communication to exist and hire and retain staff. And because the employer brand is obviously in different places, you're communicating that and trying to position that through your career website, your job sites, your review sites. But sometimes that product and the end result, if it's a consumer product, can be part of that brand. But also, if you're a B2B company, sometimes that doesn't get seen as much. And the importance of this is pretty astounding. 72% of recruiters, say that employer brand has a significant impact on hiring. And what we're seeing right now in the hiring economy is pretty staggering. The number of people switching jobs, number of people not going back into the workforce, wanting to work for a company with a great brand. And as our panel discussion, our panelists here today know that from firsthand that people are looking at brand reputation right before they even apply. And once they go through the interview, there's more and more research than ever before because there's more information out there. And so just some level setting on kind of how NEWaukee looks at this and some of the things that I've observed over the course of being in this kind of branding field is, sometimes we even think that employer branding is just about recruitment. And I just want to kind of take a second there and talk about employer brand is really just so much more than just recruitment. It's about that consistent experience for the employees on every step of that journey, right? From the initial attraction to the interview, to the onboarding, to the training, to the reward, to the recognition. And even if they exit, that employer brand to me, or what we help with all of our clients, is that glue that holds these things all together. Employer brand has to be clear about what you deal with and what your employees' expectations are. And I think it's a really important thing that to understand that branding just isn't about recruiting that person to the company, especially in the employer region. And when we talk about that whole journey, we talk about creating a strong employer brand from the moment of attraction to the exit, right? That brand awareness and attraction campaign and that application, what that experience is like when they first join. I think one of the most important things is the onboarding and that integration or that employee embeddedness. Like, how do you create psychological attachment to the company? Really happens a lot in that onboarding process. And then, how do you give people recognition? One of the things that is one of the biggest, if people have heard of dopamine on here, when people like something on their Facebook or social media pages, another thing called the trust chemical, which is oxytocin, which is released when you get recognition, and that builds trust. And then that journey is all the way to that brand exit. When people leave, what's that experience like? And then for some of us that have built alumni or talent communities, what happens after they leave? Because just because they leave doesn't mean goodbye forever, right? So is your messaging consistent? Do your values shine through at every stage? And that's what people are looking for. What's the word of mouth for employees as well. Um, and I think this kind of step 3 here in this employer branding thing is not thinking, acting, and planning. Or not thinking, but acting and planning long term. There's short term and then there's long term. So creating an employer brand is no quick fix, right? It takes a long time to establish this. Again, we talked about it's not just a recruitment campaign where you get one-way communication into your email database, but different departments need to be on board. You need to prioritize what you do first. Perhaps there's you undercover some information in your surveys that leads you to create a longer term journey for employees. And then what happens when people are leaving? Why are they leaving? All these things matter, and it's not a short-term fix. So brand takes a long time to process, a long time to build, and it could be, the thing that's unfortunate about brands is it can be tarnished in one simple tweet, and that's something we want to kind of stick away from. And how do we build it, um, build this community? And then, failing to recognize this as a business function is what I see in a lot of companies. We have different departments for marketing, we have different departments for brand, we have HR, but employer brand really needs to be its own business function, and not just hierarchy or internal politics. It needs to be part of the discussion always now. I mean, if you think about a company from startup to large scale, I mean, you spend a majority of probably all your time finding talent, replacing talent, scaling talent. If talent is what you focus on as a company, and obviously the better talent, as you can see, for like people in Milwaukee or Bucks and Six, had the right talent yesterday. And so right talent does matter, and focusing on having this part of a core business function is important. And then and this is another thing I tell people: don't assume you need all the experience to be good at employer branding. Some of the best startup stories and founders that have scaled companies, the brand has come not because they've worked on it, because they have a vision. And it's the brand, the employer brand person doesn't need all the experience in the world to create a great employee experience. And to me, the best brands they reinforce connection, learning, inspiration, and community. And you think about people creating great brands like Patagonia or Airbnb, or even Peloton, creating this community of people that never actually meet in person. It's just kind of amazing to me the way they can create this brand that's a consumer facing but leads to all these communities. And I want to showcase some of that. And the difference between what we're talking about today, talent brand and talent community, is the difference between an audience, which I think is a large mistake that a lot of employer brands make, is just about a one-way communication, right? We send out our newsletters, our tweets, our broadcast, whatever we broadcast on YouTube, and podcasts. All that stuff is one way where communication flows. And then you have a lot of employer brands that build networks, people that interact with you, and there's some two-way communication, but you're still left off that community. And when you build a great talent brand, you have a community where people are interacting with each other. They feel a sense of ownership, even if they don't work at the company. There's creating micro communities around it. There's multi-way communication. It's not just top down. And those are the brands. When I go back to Peloton, you think of all the micro, when I go back to this slide, like Nike created a run app, and there's all these communities that formed around it. Airbnb has a whole conference around people that come together, that are Airbnb hosts. There's a sense of pride there. And so I think these are the things that are important. And I want to kind of move on to our guests here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but I felt it was really important to kind of set the stage there, and kind of go from position on to our next conversation here. So let me just stop sharing my screen, and now we're going to introduce our guests here. I'm going to go through our questions, but first, how about this? How about we start with Anthony Jones? Why don't you introduce yourself, and we'll go down the line of my Zoom screen.
Oh, sure. Well, thanks for having me. And hello, everyone. My name is Anthony Jones, and I'm the Director of Talent Brand and Employee Experience at Rockwell Automation. For those of you from the area, from the Milwaukee area, you'd recognize us as from the massive four-sided clock tower on the south side of Milwaukee. I think they refer to it as the Polish moon, but yeah, that's our building. That's our global headquarters. That's where I'm sitting today. We are, as far as who we are, we're the largest company in the world dedicated to industrial automation and digital transformation, with a mission to make the world more intelligent, more productive, and more sustainable. We're a global company. That's one of the things I love about the work I do and working for this company is that we're global. We have over 23,000 employees in over 100 countries, and we were founded over 117 years ago. So that's me and Rockwell Automation.
Thanks, Anthony. April?
Thanks, Jeremy. Hi, everybody. My name is April Sherman. I am the Talent Brand and Recruitment Marketing Lead at American Family Insurance, based in Madison, Wisconsin. American Family Insurance, for those who aren't familiar, is a mutual insurance company focusing on property, casualty, commercial, life, and even into the investment and retirement planning space. I manage, as I mentioned, Talent Brand for American Family Insurance, which is a relatively new role for the organization, but really exciting opportunity. Prior to that, I came from Wells Fargo, where my background was consumer marketing and communications, and then moved into the talent acquisition space where I managed employer brand and recruitment marketing for about 6 years before transitioning out. So definitely have a different background, but I think it's a similar background to some of the others who are now in the talent branding space. So excited to be here.
Awesome. Rose?
Hi, everyone. I'm coming to you this morning from Brooklyn, New York, and I am the Global Talent Brand Lead at Squarespace. For those who are not familiar, or maybe you are, essentially it's an all-in-one platform to build an online presence. And so our flagship product is essentially you're able to build a platform or a website using Squarespace without learning or knowing how to code. So maybe some of you have side businesses or blogs or side hustles that live that on Squarespace. So I've been there for about 2 years, and I actually came over to do their in-house talent brand and recruitment marketing work from LinkedIn. And so I started my career at LinkedIn, and I was actually in sales selling talent brand solutions, if you're familiar with some of those offerings that LinkedIn has. And Squarespace just happened to be one of my clients who I really love to work with. And I had really good relationships there. And I was super curious about moving out of sales and actually managing more of the in-house talent brand. And so that's what really inspired me to kind of move away from that sales career and really hone in onto this employer brand world.
Awesome. And Alicia, who before when we were in the green room, said she was a new Bucks fan. So.
Of course. I'm the biggest fan. No, I am. My name's Alicia, and I'm actually with American Airlines. I'm the talent engagement and employer brand lead. We just had a team rebrand from talent attraction and employer brand to talent engagement and employer brand. But American Airlines is one of the largest airlines in the world. We are making a comeback, a steady comeback as travel ramps up. So we're really excited. The industry is picking back up. I would say pre-COVID, we don't have numbers today, but our team, where we had about, I would say 130,000 team members. Today, we don't have an exact number because our targets are moving. Just to give you an idea of the size of the company, obviously we are a global company. I am based in Dallas-Fort Worth, where our headquarters is at. But just a little bit about me, I actually started in news. So my dream job was to be an anchor woman, to be on news, and then I kind of shifted from news to corporate communications, and then landed a role at American. And I would say the underlying tie between all of them is storytelling. That's what I love to do. So from news to corp com to talent engagement, employer brand, it's all about storytelling and how we tell our story.
Awesome. I'm going to start with you, Alicia, because I think it's, how does it, in your, especially, your industry was very impacted by COVID over some of the, other tech industries. How does talent brands show up inside and outside the company? And, how were you what was different about it during the pandemic compared to how you're thinking about it maybe after?
Yeah, sure. So I would say right now we're in a moment of transformation. We obviously our teams are impacted. We are now a mighty team of 2, and I report up to the head of executive recruitment and talent attraction. But aside from that, pre-pandemic, the team had just launched our employer brand with our new career site launch in March, just as COVID hit. And our underlying message was feel free. So at American, our jobs liberate us. You can be whoever you are. And then throughout the pandemic, people weren't feeling free. I always got told, I'm writing them off. I don't feel free at American. With all the changes, I don't feel free. So it wasn't the right moment during the pandemic to make these changes, but kind of steering out. We have made a shift. We did a brainstorm session, did a strategy session internally, and said, who are we? What's our DNA? And it always came back to our team members are the people that powered our airline throughout the pandemic. We wouldn't have an airline without our team members. Sometimes we ended up being a skeleton crew. That's just the reality. And now we're building back up. So we shifted our kind of messaging or employer brand to "You are why we fly." And ironically, that is what marketing has. So we kind of married up our messaging to what marketing has. And I always say marketing looks at it from a customer-focused lens, and then we look at it from a candidate-focused lens, right? I would say the underlying message of that ties into our mission of caring for people on life's journey. So at American, we care for people on life's journey, and it's all about you. We do things for the customer, and then on the candidate side, it's all about how the candidate is helping our company, taking someone from point A to point B and helping them on their journey. So that's how we're talking about it right now. Again, we're in a moment of transformation. So definitely a lot of collaboration between different departments, between corporate communications, landing and development, but we're looking at our cultural values. It's something we're looking at as a company. Right now, we talk about our leadership attributes. So I would say a moment of transformation, and that's how we're starting to talk about it. I haven't got to the point. Later on this year, we're going to be giving our career site a facelift so that messaging reflects on our career site. Right now, we're just working on our internal messaging. So, when we're speaking to candidates and we're talking about careers the same way.
Awesome. This next question, I'm actually going to go to everybody because I think everybody probably has a different theory on this or different how they address this. And I think Anthony, even we had talked when you were first starting this, but there's a lot of people on the line, and we received some questions beforehand about how do you start a talent brand initiative in a company who has never had it. And so I'm just going to start, Rose, with you because you're next on my list here. Can you answer that question? And then I'll go to April, Anthony, and then we'll go back to Alicia.
Yeah, so I think there's definitely a couple different ways to start. I don't think there's, always kind of one set way. So I'm going to kind of say a couple different things here, but one thing that stands out is definitely starting with education. I think the talent brand space isn't something that comes intuitively to everyone, right? And so to be able to communicate it to your stakeholders internally to make a business case for it in the first place. But that business case really starts with education. And so talking to your peers, talking to different teams about what the differences are. I like to use, I'm big on analogies. So when I even talk about talent brand to someone who's not familiar with it, maybe some of my marketing peers are like, talent brand, so is that like recruiting? And I'm like, well, recruiting is an aspect of it, but it's not necessarily the whole pie. So I like to use analogies in the sense of if you think about any sort of brand out there, like a company you actually like, I like to use Facebook just because everyone is familiar with the company. Facebook has had its ups and downs, right, as a consumer brand. And most notably, for example, the Social Dilemma kind of hit them hard, right, with like what they're doing. If you've seen that documentary around Facebook and how they're using data. So from a consumer brand standpoint, you can argue that Facebook was kind of maybe in a down period. But when you actually think about like, what is it like to work at Facebook? You can argue that actually a lot of people in the tech community in particular are like, I've heard Facebook is a really great place to work, even though maybe some of the things that they're doing are being considered, are controversial in some ways. Or if you think about another brand. So I, as far as like educating people, I like to kind of bring them down a level and just say like, let's actually talk about some of your favorite companies out there. And do you even know what it's like to work there? And sometimes they'll be like, actually, I've never even thought about what it's like to work at this company. So I start there. And then the second piece is just from like my own internal sake is similar to what I think Alicia was saying, is really understanding your DNA, because you can't put messages out there without actually understanding what's your spirit, what's your culture, what do your people say are the good things and the bad things. Because when you put messages out there and you start to build that narrative around your company, it has to match what your employees are feeling. Otherwise, that disconnect can really cause some like internal discord with some employees. So it's very important to understand what makes you uniquely positioned to attract whomever you're trying to attract, and what is that secret sauce, and what actually is, kind of true to who you are. So doing that thorough kind of like understanding and talking to your employees to understand what is your DNA.
April, what about you?
I'm just going to say, Rose, yes, all of that. Yeah, I mean, it's 100% education. My number one thing is education, making sure that, those that I know will be, crucial stakeholders and partners in the work have a good understanding as to the impact of employer brand and how it's different than consumer branding, product branding. And also that it really truly does impact the bottom line as it relates to the business, as you were saying at the beginning, Jeremy. So education is, I think, the number one, making sure that I bring to the table proof points to show, what this branding work can do for organizations. And then, the analogy that Rose was talking about, I do the same thing in a similar fashion. I talk about how, to help differentiate between, consumer branding and talent branding. I talk about consumer branding as marketing a product and service, or branding a product and service, while talent branding is truly empowering the people behind those products and services to tell their stories and share their experiences. So it's really a way to enable us to share what it's like, to be within those walls. And then again, that education piece, of course, extends into the stakeholder management. I think that's a really important aspect of it. Really sort of doing a road show, if you will. And I also almost call it like being on a campaign trail, where you're connecting with those key stakeholders to make sure that they truly see that I understand what it is, and that I'm committed to it. And that also I will be bringing them along on the journey. So having, sort of getting that DNA component that we were talking about, what is important to you, whether it's marketing, communications, HR, talent development. There's so many areas of the organization that we can't leave behind when we're doing this work, and the education. So very much focused on those key stakeholder groups to make sure that they're informed at the front and then brought along at the right stages of the work that's getting done.
Awesome. Anthony, everybody else is kind of a B2C product here in a way. Obviously there's other B2B customers as well, but you are strictly B2B. It's got to be different, not having any of that consumer facing product for awareness. Well, how did you start? Where'd you go about it?
Well, I think just to comment on that particular comment, I think sometimes what can happen is in the B2B space, you might not be as well known. You're not a household name. And so therefore you're not necessarily that sort of sexy brand out there, that sort of thing that people are maybe more aware of, who you are, your values, what it's like to work there, because maybe you're in the media, that kind of thing. But so there's that added layer of some additional effort that has to go into sort of, sharing who you are and making yourself known. I think that, my peers on this call, Rose and April, what they've mentioned so far, I think is probably the two most critical things. I think that education is really important, especially, this space that we're in is relatively new. Now, there are people out there that are thought leaders in the space that have been doing it for a long time, but it's a relatively new thing, as a lot of our companies are experiencing transformation, as Alicia mentioned, growth. We're experiencing, massive growth right now. And so it's a new space. So there's the education component of, well, what is employer brand? But then there's also the piece of, and where I spend a lot of time is helping educate our leaders and our stakeholders on what it takes to do this work. What's the investments that have to be made? And part of that's just understanding how other companies are doing it. Part of that's understanding what's needed for the specific markets and the type of audience you're trying to go after, that sort of thing. So I would just say that that's a big education piece there that you'll spend a lot of time doing. I've been doing it now for 3 years in this particular space of employer brand, and it hasn't changed. I'm continuing to educate people on what it takes. And that's ultimately what's going to get you the credibility. That's what's going to get you the budgets you need, that sort of thing, and those investments. The other piece is, and they had alluded to this, but research. I think that once you're in this space, once you're in your role, you really need to start to understand and assess what your employer value proposition is, right? You need to understand what's been done to date around employer branding. In my case, there was really nothing. So it's kind of, well, how do we start from scratch? How are we going to really understand who we are, what we have to offer, what differentiates us, that sort of thing. But it's that research that's really important. And research meaning a couple of different things. One is internally. What keeps your employees there? And you can do that by assessing engagement surveys. We have an engagement survey we do every year. You can assess exit surveys, and that'll give you a good picture and understanding of, again, why people might stay here, what's frustrating to them, that sort of thing. Because I think you have to understand both the good and the bad. I think the other piece to it then is also externally. Now there's agencies out there that can help with this as well, with sort of aggregating external data to really understand how people view you outside of the workplace. But there's also exit surveys that you can do. There's Glassdoor reviews. There is, all the different review sites, that sort of thing. Social media, you can kind of assess that, audit it, listen to it, that sort of thing. But I would say that research is a big component. And I think the third thing I'll just mention is, there's really two types of people coming into these roles. And I would say where I'm seeing more of is more marketers are coming into the employer brand space. But there are also recruiters that typically will then get into the employer brand space. And I would just say that you have to, on both sides, you have to recognize where your blind spots are. So if I'm coming in as a marketer, I need to be honest and say, okay, I understand marketing, but I might not understand recruiting. So you need to partner with your peers on the recruitment side to really understand recruiting, and vice versa. If you're a recruiter coming into this, yeah, sure, you get candidates, sure, you get sort of how to recruit and the processes around it and that sort of thing. But do you really understand marketing? And if you don't, then you got to ramp up and educate yourself on that sort of thing. So I would say that's my other piece of advice when you're getting started.
Thanks for the top 10, Anthony. Appreciate it. There's some questions in the chat, which I'm going to, if you don't mind, I'm going to ping pong back and forth for some of my questions to those. I'm going to ask one more question, then I'm going to go to some in the chat. But Anthony, you kind of brought up measuring it, monitoring things. And I think measuring talent brand is where sometimes it can be amorphous, right? Like, how do people feel about a company? And you can put that in, it's sometimes hard to pin down. Even when you talk to people about culture, sometimes it's like, they sometimes describe the programs and events they do, or it's a great place to, work, family, that kind of stuff. And it's like, well, what is culture? How do you measure? So I just want really quickly to go around, and what tools do you use to measure this, or what have you put in place, or what are you thinking about? And I'll start with you, April.
Sure. And Jeremy, were you saying what tools do we use to measure culture, or in general?
Talent brand, sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry, sure. I was talking about culture. Talent brand. Sure, what are your KPIs?
Some of the things you actually mentioned, we definitely look at, our employee engagement results. That's a big indicator for us as to, whether, what we're branding and putting out there is actually true and real, right? That authenticity is really, really important. We also look at retention. We know that, a strong talent brand really absolutely impacts, reductions in turnovers, Of course, we look at cost per hire. I think I look at that a little bit more on the marketing side of things, but that definitely is something that we look at as a KPI for brand as well. We also look at employee referrals. So understanding if employees, right, if they're, happy in their journey with the organization, they're more willing to make those referrals to potential new talent. And then we look at accepted offers as well. Accepted offers is definitely something that can be impacted, as well as new hire salaries. We know that those two components absolutely are impacted by a positive brand when candidates have a positive perception of the organization. Obviously, they're more willing to accept an offer and might be willing to accept a potentially lower salary in some cases. And then we also look at ENPS, so Employee Net Promoter Score, to understand if current employees are in a place where they feel that they would recommend the organization to others. That's a key indicator for us as well. So those are some of the top ones that we look at outside of the broader set of KPIs that kind of fall more into the recruitment marketing space.
Yeah, that's awesome. Maybe I'll go around, and if you have anything different or you want to reiterate, that's fine too. Alicia, sorry, I forgot that we're not in a room.
No, you're good. I was like, April did a really good job. Basically, a lot what April shared is what I would agree with. I do want to add time to fill is something that I would look at, just because for us, we have a lot of new talent advisors. We have a lot of new team members today. And I feel time to fill is also an indicator of, is the process going smoothly? Is everyone on the same page? Is everyone? And we had actually an all hands last week where we kind of broke down the recruitment process and where we can make improvements. And one thing that came up was consistency. And I think that goes along with time to fill. And I think it also helps the candidate either make their decision maybe a little faster if they are informed with everything up front and if there's transparency. So I would add time to fill, and then separately for employer brand, depending on what platforms you choose to target, like for us, if we were to choose to target LinkedIn and make that as part of our employer brand strategy, looking at those LinkedIn metrics too. Our applications on LinkedIn, our applications, our clicks, engagement as part of that larger funnel.
Awesome. Rose?
Yeah, I would, so I have kind of three things to add. The first is, naturally when you have a strong employer brand, the goal is to get more people interested. So you want that quantity to go up. But I focus a lot on quality, because also with employer brand, you're not trying to attract every single person in this world, right? You want to attract certain people, right? And that's very much part of how you message out your narrative, is you want to attract certain people that latch onto that. So we look at quality in the sense of like, okay, if we got 10,000 applications, how many of those actually transitioned into a recruiter phone screen? From there, how many of them went on to become on-site? And those quality conversions are really important to us. So we measure, does that increase when we put out more messages, or what is that kind of looking like? The second piece we look at are influenced hires, which is always like a really tricky metric to be able to look at. So there's two ways that we look at it. The first is, when I came to Squarespace, I actually inserted a question in our new hire onboarding, because new hires are like super thrilled. They're usually more engaged because they're ready to start their job. So we kind of snuck in this question on their first week of, what influenced your decision to pursue an opportunity at Squarespace? That's pretty much how it's phrased. And then we have kind of different options that they can check off. And so what we're able to do is see what's influencing their decision. And oftentimes it's like the content that you're putting out on LinkedIn, or maybe it was our Glassdoor reviews. So we want to understand not only if we're influencing them, but how we're influencing them. And then the third piece is definitely goes back to the content. And so I'm constantly measuring, like, if we are pushing out a piece of content on LinkedIn, if we're not seeing a 1% engagement rate, like for me, I'm like, I need to at least hit that 1%, because the more times people engage with you and see you, then the more likely they are to eventually be interested in your company. So those are some of the things that we look at.
And yeah, I think let you clean up here.
Yeah, sure. And I think what everyone has said is spot on. I do want to reiterate what Rose just talked about, which was quality, because I think oftentimes you think volume is a good thing, right? But that can overburden your recruitment team. So quality, Rose is absolutely correct. The quality is so critical. And there's a lot of ways of sort of enhancing that quality of those leads and the candidates that are coming through. The only other things I would add is, a lot of what we do as well is, and some of my peers here have mentioned that, but is content. And so there's things that you should be measuring as it relates to, is it effective or not? You should be constantly testing your content, that sort of thing. And so I would say some of the metrics around that might be engagement with your content. It might be site referrals, organic traffic that's being generated, application conversions is another thing. So as you can see, there's a lot to measure. I would say there's different tiers of the importance of each of the things that we've talked about. But for those listening to this call, if you're taking notes, I think that those are some of the more important things to be paying attention to.
Excellent. I'm going to go to some of the questions in the chat because they're piling up and I don't want to, and I'm going to do this in a way you probably shouldn't do it on Zoom, but I'm going to, whoever wants to answer it first, maybe give me a little like hand raise or come off mute so I can notice that. But the entire student body of Marian University asked, what books, podcasts, webinars would you recommend for building upon current learning in this topic? Or is there anything that you've read lately or have? April, you want to go first? I saw you raise your hand.
Yeah, there's a couple podcasts that I listen to. One is, really easy to remember. It's called the Employer Brand Podcast. I think it's produced by Link Humans. They do interviews like this with talent brand leads at various organizations and in different industries. It's short, easily digestible.
Easy to remember too.
Easy to remember, the Employer Brand Podcast. Another one is Changing State. The guys over at Change State run that one, and it's similar format in terms of speaking to practitioners that are in this space. So I like those conversations just because, for the same reason that I like these conversations, you always learn something from, people that are in different industries and different spaces. I don't have any tips on books. I'm a podcaster, so I haven't dove into any good books yet. I know there's a couple out there that have just hit, but I'll leave it to the group to see what they think. There's also some really good groups too. And there's the Talent Brand Alliance and the Employer Brand Forum on Facebook. Those are good areas and spaces for people to, ask questions and share ideas.
Rose.
Yeah, when I transitioned to be in-house, I definitely felt like there was a gap of learning that I needed to fill. And so I was really excited that I came across what I'm about to ping in the chat, Rally. If you've never heard of it, it's an online community of recruitment marketers, which, if you don't know what that is, it's basically like the idea of like product marketing and brand management. It's the same thing. It's like recruitment marketing and employer brand really go together. But I just pinged their kind of blog, and I would literally go all the time and just get these little sound bites, and just being well versed in some of the language and just really understanding candidate journey, all the nuances really helped me. So just take a look at that if you haven't heard of it.
Excellent. I'm going to add some nerdy stuff. I think, there's a lot of books out there, but where I find the most important content is in psychology around employee embeddiveness and psychological attachment to place, and reading research papers like a complete geek. You can find how people react to things and what makes things sticky. And then if you can put them into your talent brand journey for somebody, like for example, all the things around people forming friendship in a company and how that attachment to place is longer, and how do you build a community of people that kind of come together in a company. I've seen some people do cohort recruiting, things like that. So there's just a lot of different things around how people interact with things and what makes things sticky, I think is important. If you want to get really deep into things, that's a really good way to start building brands. I have a question here that I'm sure probably keeps you up every night. What do you do when employees have a negative view of a job and how things are being run? And maybe let's say, I'm guessing maybe they post something publicly, so it pings employer brand or talent brand. how have you dealt with that in the past? Any war stories, maybe? Anyone want to raise their hand and go first?
I mean, I can go. I think one, you have to understand too that some of these things, like even on Glassdoor, people go there to complain. So I'm not saying disregard them by any means. This
So you're
is
saying delete it,
learn.
Anthony?
What's that?
Delete the post?
Yeah, just delete it. Delete it. No, that's probably the worst thing you do. But no, I would say that, well, a couple different things. One is what we used to do. I'll tell you, it's really, it's hard to manage. And so you just have to, you either have to have a resource to be able to focus on this. But if you are getting reviews on something like Glassdoor, best practice honestly is responding to them. Again, and I would say in a way, much like you would with customer service, like in an appropriate manner, but responding to them and either, and I would say not necessarily apologizing, but recognizing the feedback and that you're going to take it back to learn more and that sort of thing. If you're honestly able to do that. Now, I will say that trying to do that is really hard to sustain. So just recognize that it takes a lot of work to do that. But so then, yeah, back to that point is there's a lot of people that go on these types of review sites to complain. So know that you're going to experience probably more negativity than positivity. So just be very, honest with yourself about that. But then two, I think it's, use it as an opportunity to learn a little bit about some of those things. Maybe there is a gap in sort of the culture and the experience in one part of the world that you have a team out there, and you should really bring it back internally to really try to understand, hey, is this an issue that we should be taking a look at, and that sort of thing. So I would say that use that and take action when appropriate, but also know that you don't set expectations with anyone that's an easy or something that can be done very easily or quickly. So
April, you have your hand up. I don't know if that was from last time or that's.
I should have put it down because
Okay.
Anthony just said everything that I was going to say. Yeah, no, same. Respond if you can, but yes, Anthony, like it is tough. You need a resource for that, and you can't just sometimes do it. I just set up a process for that when I was at Wells, and it took a long time, as you can imagine, because you have to get buy-in from the organization if you are going to start engaging, especially if you're at a large scale organization. You need to make sure that you get buy-in, and also that you bring in key stakeholders so that they can respond. I mean, sometimes you're ghost responding on their behalf, right? But having their presence in that engagement is very helpful. But it takes, it's just like social media. I know, so I'm sure you guys will nod your head when I say this, but often, you hear organizations say, look, we should do all the social, but don't designate a resource to it. It is like it's like having a child. So it definitely is a commitment, but I agree with everything Anthony said. You can also look at it as an answer key. And if you start to see themes, negative or positive, those are things that you can start storytelling about. You can tell stories about negative themes. You just have to figure out how you're going to approach it. And you need to bring that internally to say, there might be an opportunity for us to make a change here. Or if it's a perceived negative, right, but it's just the truth, like very aggressive sales goals. If that's just the truth, it's the truth. And you need to be able to start telling that in your stories. So I kind of look at Glassdoor oftentimes as an answer key as well when you're starting to build out your stories.
We're going to put that on American Family shirts. Talent brand is your new child. And I want you to put them. Excellent. Anybody else want to touch on that topic, or should you want me to move on here?
I have something to add, Jeremy. I would say, I think even though it's negative, it could be just with a piece of transparency. So for instance, at American, we see a lot of reviews saying long hours, mandatory overtime. That is, unfortunately, that's just part of the industry as well. We are a 24/7 operation. If there's bad weather, we can't leave passengers at the airport. We have to get them out or get them on another flight. So I think part of that is telling that story ahead of time and that transparency when you speak to candidates, when you recruit candidates of, hey, this role or this job entails long hours. It is, you may be working overtime, you will be working holidays. So the expectation there is upfront, and hopefully that will help mitigate the challenge of the negative feedback of the things that, as April said, it's just the truth. It's just quite frank that at at the, at American or not a specific company you're going to experience?
This question kind of dovetails from the last one, but I think, and I'm gonna direct this at you, Rose, because you're not a new company, but you're the newest company of all the companies here, I guess. But maybe there's a little bit of context here. But what if the organization business was not yet established early? And this is from Danielle. Early consumer employees had negative, basically it's a newer company, had negative views, experience, and how things are run. What strategies would you suggest to re-engage early adopters? Yeah, I mean, that's totally, you're gonna run into so many ups and downs as a startup, or in that startup in an earlier company. What things can you do, or what advice would you give, Danielle?
And just so I understand, to engage kind of those more tenured employees?
It looks like, and Danielle, maybe if you want to come off and kind of clarify your question.
Yeah, they're
Come off
not
mute.
tenured. These are employees that had left the workforce or just had the workplace, and then they impact essentially our recruitment, because like they'll say stories or to other people that consume us. So it's just like something that I'm curious about. How would you kind of like re-engage them and say, oh, actually we do these things now based off of your feedback. But it's kind of hard because they continue to tell those stories.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, well, first of all, just going back to kind of getting that feedback, which was, attached to the last question, but I do think it's really important as like a talent brand person to not just be a marketer. Like, I'm a culture champion, and that's how I think of myself. So it is actually my job, I believe, to really route that feedback to the appropriate people. So if I'm seeing something, like actually delivering that to my senior leadership team, and aggregating that and making sure that these employees who are leaving, or that these, negative perceptions for whatever reason, are actually being taken into consideration. And so what I can do, at least in what's in my control, is to surface that as much as I can. But something that I do, and this is just kind of a little bit more tactical, but I run our LinkedIn campaigns. Actually, we have a new partner now as part of our employer brand team, and she's going to be taking that over. But one thing that you have the ability to do is you actually have the ability to target past employees that worked at your company. So that's a little bit more tactical, but I like to turn that feature on so that they are being actually targeted with some of our content, because I do think that it's important for them to understand how an organization has evolved and grown, and to really understand like where we are from where they might have left us. So, don't completely, ignore those individuals, because you're right. Like, they can become the opposite of a brand ambassador, which there's not really much you can do at that point. It's all really now just kind of looking internally at your organization and becoming a better organization. You can't be like, don't say, it's, people are free to do and however they please. It's more about rectifying whatever areas of opportunity you have, and then also continuing to share that story with them and with others.
Great response. Another question from the panel, or in the chat room. Can panelists speak on the intersection of DE&I initiatives and their talent brands, especially if the brand needs to be a bit more aspirational because their current talent population is not particularly diverse? How do you balance, sorry, the chat moved up here. How do you balance being authentic and where you'd like the organization to be one day? And I'll maybe everybody can answer that, or if someone wants to kick it off. I think it's a really important question. Anybody want to kick that one off?
I mean, I can kick it off. Here we have a team dedicated to DEI. We have a new chief DEI person as well. His name is Bobby Griffin. He's amazing. Worked at Coke, that kind of stuff. But we have a team that's doing incredible stuff. One of my colleagues, Michelle Mathai, she oversees a lot of that work as well. And so, yeah, there's a lot of things that our companies are doing to prioritize and focus on DEI. And I think it's our job as a talent brand team to really look at a couple of different things. One is, how do we talk about this journey that we're on? It's great to be honest and authentic about what that is, and then talk about some of those milestones that you're hitting as you're going along the way. I think the other thing that they're trying to do as well, and we want to spotlight as a talent brand team, is they want to be transparent about you know, our DEI numbers, the activities that we have underway, that sort of thing. And so we want to be able to highlight that because we know it matters to candidates. We know that's something that they care about. The other thing too is, you know, a company like ours, we have diversity within it. Yeah, we definitely have a lot of work to do, but we've got a lot of great stories and people to highlight here as well. And I think that that's also about it. Allow your employees to talk about their experience. That should be your strategy in general, is to leverage your employees and allow them to do the storytelling for you. But that's, you know, something to focus on is partner with your employee resource groups. Those are the ones where you've got these communities of people that get together, partner with them to say, hey, let's talk about some of the stuff, the activities you have underway. Let's talk about your experience, that sort of thing.
Anyone else want to chime in on that one?
Again, second what Anthony says, you know, it's really that, you know, from an aspiration, you know,
The
what's
talent
the
brand kumbaya right now, by the way.
right? I'll just like high five. Good job.
Yeah.
I don't have to say anything. I don't have to say anything. Good job.
Yeah.
From an aspirational standpoint, like I think it's a really good question. What should that blend be, right? You know, I think it's really important to be authentically transparent about the fact that this is all a journey. No matter what company you're at right now, it's a journey, and we have to be transparent about that. And like Anthony said, our organization has made some really true and real commitments that we need to talk about and share, but in a way that also says we know we have a ways to go. You know, here are the things that we're doing today, and here are the things that we're committed to. And then we know that this is going to be a journey. It's not, you know, you get to put your flag in the ground and say we did it, we made it. So I think that's really important. I think for us at American Family, you know, being committed to closing equity gaps and being really focused on social impact has been part of our DNA for actually quite some time. So again, as Anthony was saying, it's an opportunity for us to lean into those initiatives. At American Family, we have Free to Dream, we have Dream Bank. These are community initiatives and investments that are truly focused on bringing people up and closing those equity gaps. And so it's leaning into the people that are part of those initiatives to allow them to tell the story and demonstrate those commitments that we are part of, and that we're going to continue to expand and grow. But I think the authenticity is part of it. You know, I think a rule of thumb that I've heard with talent branding in general is, you know, it should be 80% authentic and 20% aspirational, you know, so you want to make sure that, you know, you're being true to when it is aspirational, you state that it's aspirational in the best way that you can.
Okay, anybody else, or should I keep going here? Okay, I'll move on to the next question. We're approaching 15 minutes, or a little over 15 minutes left. Kind of blending talent brand and community, and how important community is becoming. I mean, as we talk about talent brand becoming its own department, I'm also seeing a rise of community managers being, you know, community being a department in companies, and that growing into its own thing. Is how do we look at our company as a community? How do we interact with the community different? What I'm even seeing is, like, it's not, community isn't a philanthropic thing anymore, where you're just putting it like in the philanthropic bucket. It's becoming a real business case. And I'm curious, those two things kind of interact a lot. And I guess the question is, you know, most of us, or most of the companies here, can people, you know, in the knowledge economy, people can work very well, but some of the, like American Airlines, people need to be at certain places and specific. As we kind of blend those things, how are you changing up, and this question kind of dovetails into what Kathy was saying in the chat, how are you changing your talent brand recruitment challenges not to be just around where your corporate headquarters is, or are you? Like, you know, that it used to be come to where we are. You might not really need to do that as much anymore if you're hiring people from all over. Is that, is that right? Is that wrong? Or how are you thinking differently? That was a lot of question and a lot of not questions. Sorry about that. And anybody
So
want to
Jeremy,
take?
yeah, I have a question right back at that. Are you talking about in terms of remote work?
Well, yeah, I mean, so, I can think of like, every city has a talent attraction strategy to move people to their city. And a lot of times they work with employers to do that. And, people obviously still want people to move their cities, but now companies are seeing the possibility for people that can remote work to say, well, go work from anywhere, move wherever you want. What do we care? Is that change your talent brand communication? Is that something you thought about a lot, or is that kind of talk through that a little bit?
Yeah, I can add something to that. I think, well, number one, for us at American, we are very much an in-person business. And unfortunately, we don't, our company's just not there, quite there with remote work.
Yeah.
So for us, our strategy would still be, you need to be at the location. I think a part of it for us is, our frontline team members go to work every day. We should, look at going to work every day. I think on the corporate side, there is some flexibility, and we don't have a strategy, there is no policy of complete hybrid or you're going to work from home. It's just that flexibility piece. And I would say in terms of community, attracting talent, it would still be attracting talent to where headquarters is or where the position would be based, highlighting, what's for us, it would be DFW, why Texas, what's great about DFW. We haven't quite gotten there with the different locations piece, but that's just not what our business model is.
What about you, Rose? Have you, Anthony, I'll pop over here next.
Yeah, I can. Well, so I think this is a good question because we're actually actively thinking about this when it comes to remote work, given, we're definitely still in the state of like figuring things out of what that looks like. And so I don't have like the perfect answer right now around like how we're going to position remote work. Will most likely be some sort of like combination of remote and also in person. So like more of a flex. But, a company like Spotify, who recently put out like work from anywhere, that's definitely drawing a lot of attention. But I would say, it is more of a policy thing, right? So you actually have to understand if that is true or not to be able to put that messaging. But what we are doing is something where, we do have multiple locations. We have teams in Portland, we have an LA office. We also our EU hub is Dublin. And so it's very important to work with those individuals in those offices because, I am New York based and that's Squarespace's headquarters. And so as much as I love to talk about New York and like working in, the big city, it's really important for me to understand like what makes Portland unique, what makes that environment unique. What are some of the nuances with Dublin and what are some of the challenges that they're having? Dublin is like a whole different ball game. And so I have essentially monthly meetings with 3 individuals over there who can kind of give me the lowdown. So I'm like not totally out of the loop, right? Like I have to keep my pulse on these other micro cultures and micro communities within our organization, because as a global talent brand lead, I'm responsible for attracting people in Dublin. And the only way to do that is going back to kind of like that foundation that we keep talking about is like understand internally what that pulse is like so you can be able to message that out properly.
Yeah, then you want to step, and that's, yeah, it's really fascinating, Rose. I mean, that has to be incredibly difficult to create a brand in all these micro communities where the culture is completely different and have that same employee experience worldwide that someone in Dublin could have and talk the same as someone that's in Brooklyn about what it means to them to work there. Anthony, do you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to add that Kathy's asking a great question, by the way, and I think it's something that, as Rose just mentioned, that we're all kind of dealing with. A lot of the HR teams have, in our case, we have an enabled workforce team that's really taking a look at what's our model going to be. We're doing the hybrid approach, that sort of thing. But I would just say it's tricky. I think most companies realize that a lot of work can be done anywhere. And when you are more open-minded to remote work, you're going to also open up the candidate pool to really great talent. And so I think that there's that one hand where remote work, depending on the role, is probably a good approach, especially if you're looking for the best talent in the world. But then there's roles that require you to be in person, or maybe is for the sake of how work gets done on a specific team, that hiring manager really wants them to be, at least as part of the hybrid model, to be in the office on some days, that sort of thing, so that they can, get work done. So it's really a depends sort of case, but I think, like Rose had mentioned too, when you're doing this, from a talent brand perspective, it all comes down to positioning. So if this work or this job that's open, that is a critical job that you're going to promote, or maybe there's a whole bunch of jobs in a specific campus that we're trying to promote, it's really all about how you're going to position that job. Is it remote? Then your positioning matters on how you're selling it. If it's local, then focus on things like, I know Kathy asked this question. She's the CEO of Milwaukee Tech Hub, partnering with organizations like that to really sell the fact that we're bringing tech to Milwaukee, or NEWaukee, right? Partnering with NEWaukee and saying, hey, here's a great organization that can really get you immersed in the city. So you're going to have different strategies. So I would say that, I guess that's my long-winded answer of saying that you got to take a look and assess all the different things to make some decisions on how you're going to position it and sell it.
Yeah, Anthony, to talk about, or just to piggyback on the remote work thing, I think we often think too much about, is it going to be everybody remote or everybody hybrid or this, instead of looking at the individual and saying, how does that person work? How do they want to work? And I'm going to share something in the chat. There's actually, this gentleman did a really interesting research paper and an assessment on, if you take this, how you can look for levels and how people work under social distancing, remote work, high stress, self-motivation, teamwork, and collaboration. And what's really interesting about it is that we just think, as a broad population, are we going to be hybrid, or going to be in the office, or this, and not just looking at this person's being onboarded. How's the best way for them to get maximum production and feel connected to the company? It's a little bit more customization, but it is a lot more effective if you really kind of drill down to it. April, end that question on American Family. All this work that you're doing in the community to support so many initiatives, I feel like it's at the core of the business. Everything that you do is like community first. Do you want to kind of touch on that too?
Yeah, absolutely. It very much is community first, and that's a big part of who we've been for quite some time. So as I was mentioning previously, we've got so many varying initiatives across the organization, from Free to Dream, which is closing equity gaps in our communities and creating sustainable communities, to Dream Bank, which is providing educational opportunities for people in the community who want to learn about various topics. But it's very much that dream component is a very big part of who we are, and just our business in general is very much focused on communities, just based on the nature of the business. So, think of, our corporate side is one piece of it, but our agency owners are truly, in our communities in every area of in every realm of that word, community. So from a logistics or geography standpoint, we very much pivoted when at the corporate level from very much, in-person culture to opening up to remote very quickly for a lot of our corporate roles that had previously been based out of our headquarters in Madison, and that, like, we have just talked about, has really expanded that candidate slate. But our agency owners are those are brick and mortar roles. Those are roles where they need to be in these offices, in these communities. So that's a big component of it for us, is the blend. There's a hybrid for us in corporate, but those agency owners are representatives of our communities, where we need to continue to share that message out, and also work with our agency owners to be champions of our brand, to help reiterate the message of who we are and where we're located. The other piece of it for us that I think a lot of people don't know is that we are an enterprise organization. So American Family is one of a family of operating companies at our enterprise organization. We have everyone from American Family to The General to Homesite, Main Street America. There's six operating companies that make up our enterprise. And our organization is an enterprise people services organization. So we have the opportunity to be more articulate with who we are as a family of operating companies to help expand our footprint in our communities outside of just American Family. So that's definitely, Alicia kept mentioning transformation at the beginning of the call. That's definitely a transformation for us in terms of helping people to understand where we are and what the opportunities are in terms of, where they can be located and how they can be involved in what we are committed to, which is community.
Okay, now we got 9 minutes left here. I want to do like parting shots, takeaways. Like this is where you can put your quotable quote on the headlines of this when we kind of send this out to people that RSVP'd and couldn't make it. Where do you see the talent branding going? Maybe the industry segment going forward, and maybe if you can tie in any final recommendations. Do you have the people that want to create these kind of communities or these initiatives within their company if they don't have them yet? And we'll start with you, Alicia, to put you on the spot.
Fantastic.
You had your stump speech ready here.
Oh, cool. Okay, so what was the first question?
Yeah, sorry. I like to ask 6 questions in one, so you can't remember any of them. Where do you see this segment going in the future? Like as it becomes more, as obviously talent becomes even more important than we thought it was 2 years ago. And then any final recommendations for people wanting to launch talent brands in their community that haven't yet, or in their company, sorry.
Yeah, no, I think talent brand is going to be hugely important. I know right now it's more of a newer space. I think we are gaining momentum, and even within American leaders are recognizing that it is a needed function, and we do have an impact. I think for us, because we're such a big company and we can sometimes seem siloed, it's that collaboration piece. Like I need to make sure I have my internal stakeholders. I need to have learning and development, the social team, marketing, corp com. I think it's good to get everyone in the same room and have those conversations and share why it's important. And you'll find there are a lot of synergies, and a lot of teams essentially want the same thing. It's just, finding that one path. And so I do think that's super important. To add to your question of what I did want to say, I didn't get to plug it in terms of books. There were 2 books one book I read, one book is on my list when I started kind of diving into the employer brand space. I'm going to IM them in the chat. One of them is Give and Get, and it really talks about, I think Rose or Anthony or April, someone said this earlier, the purpose of an employer brand is to attract the right candidates, but repel the wrong ones. Repel, it sounds strong, right? Repel the wrong ones, but that's really the purpose, because it's not like marketing where you're selling your product to everyone. So I think for us, everything we do is having that line of transparency, being realistic with the roles. So people I think that's the biggest feedback we get. We're not transparent. For us, it makes it sound like American is a great company to work for, right? But what's it truly like? Not everything's rosy. So what are the challenges I'm going to have? Communicating that in stories, and not just a negative way, but in a more realistic way. For instance, we're going to be hiring flight attendants. What's realistic about the job? Not just you're going to travel and see the world. You're going to be away from home. You're going to be working holidays. So for us with employer brand, it's really having that piece of transparency and realism, because these team members are going to be in these roles. They can underpin these roles for years, and we want them to like their job, right? And know what to expect in the beginning.
Excellent. 5 minutes left. I want to get everybody in here. So if we could give our parting shots here, and then I'm going to go to Rose next, and then I'll go to April and Anthony.
I see talent brand becoming 2 things, more sophisticated, just with the technologies that are available in the market. It's definitely moving quickly. Companies are trying to latch on to being just more data driven when it comes to talent brand. So I definitely see that maturing. But actually, I just think people are going to care more. Like for those people that you might work with, that they're like, I don't know what that is, and I don't really care what talent brand is. There's going to be pressure to care more. Because the fact of the matter is that we have more access to information than we have ever had in this time of history. And so that means that people are looking at companies and being like, what are you doing? Are you supporting this movement? What are you doing to support these types of communities? And there's podcasts, there's webinars. I mean, people now, you go on LinkedIn and you hear about Netflix, right? And what they just did, right? They just, and I'm not getting into kind of like the ins and outs of it, but there's a lot of spotlight now on Netflix. And so there's just going to be more pressure on companies to actually care about work-life balance. The burnout epidemic is being talked about constantly. Making sure that parents have an environment in which they can thrive and balance both, living at home with their kids as well as their work. These are all things that are being talked about. So there's not going to be a world where it's going to be like, well, we can just ignore our message and our culture and what we're doing. There's going to be pressure on leadership to say, like, you actually have to care about this or we can't progress as a company. And I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, I mean, you're 100% right. Basically what this is we're going to cut these videos for each of you, and this is your way to get increased budgets. And I'm going to send them to your no, this is great. April, do you want to give your final recommendations, parting shots?
Sure. Yeah, I'll go quick because I'm like, you can see me, I'm like, yes, all of the above. I don't know, 2 words: recognized and realistic. So like what Rose said about just this being recognized, I see that, employer brand will become more relevant to business growth overall. Really become recognized as a business function. I think because of the fact that employer brand is really truly a lever for culture transformation, that recognition of the role and its impact will begin to or continue to rise to the top. And then as it relates to recommendations, I mean, we keep saying stakeholder engagement. I think that realistic component, realist, is important because it's making sure that you get stakeholder engagement, buy-in and understanding. Don't underestimate the time that it takes to spend on this before you start hard charging into building your EVP. So do that education and be realistic about the resources that you're going to need, such as budget, such as people, et cetera, to bring the brand to life. It's one thing to build a brand. It's another thing to activate it and bring it to life in the world, in the market.
Anthony, why don't you close us out?
Sure. To your question about the talent brand space, completely agree with my colleagues on the call here. I would just say, yeah, with the fact that attracting talent right now is really difficult, right? It's an inverse marketplace. Hiring is I mean, they have their choices now. It's really challenging. And so I think it's forcing our leaders to really say, okay, we need to make this a priority. We need to really focus on this. So I would see continuation of a focus around this. I think bigger investments as these teams become more sophisticated. I think a lot of people are trying to do it with teams of one. And I think a lot of us in this space are saying, that's crazy. You can't do it as a team of one. And so I think it goes to April's advice of being realistic and make sure you're not misleading leadership. You have to be realistic about it and deliver results based on that. So I think there's that piece of it. The second thing, I just wanted to offer 2 pieces of advice for people that are starting out in this space or thinking about it. One is, April had mentioned a couple communities, Talent Brand Alliance, things like that. I think it's really important as people coming into this space, especially as it's emerging, is to really start to form your network and talk to people about what they're doing. I've got friends at Nike, friends at Facebook, friends at startups, friends that, and I get to just understand and get a sort of a well-rounded idea of how people are approaching this work so that it can help inform how I might want to, or how I might try to sell it or pitch internally for some of the stuff that we're doing. So I think building that network is absolutely critical and for learning, for that sort of thing. The other piece too is internally partnering. It is so critical. I see a lot of, in some of these communities, people talking about having beef with the marketing team. That's the last thing you want. You need support from your
we
people,
know it happens.
right? And it happens, but you've got to force yourself to build these relationships, to sort of draw the line on what the responsibilities are. But it's really about partnering and being an effective partner, because the work cannot get done alone, especially with these lean teams. You need to be able to do that. So I can't stress that enough. Partnering, that's a big thing. The last thing I wanted to mention, now that we're at time, because I love books and podcasts and everything everyone mentioned is really good. One book, Positioning. I think it's awesome. It's a classic. I highly recommend it. I'm rereading this because I'm a part of a marketing book club, and they had recommended doing it from one of my favorite CMOs who oversees this book club. And so I say Positioning, and then back to your point about psychology, Jeremy, there's a book called The Power of Moments. I highly recommend it because we as talent branders should care about candidate experience. And this talks a lot about experiences. So anyway, that's it.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think my last word on this is we're seeing talent brand be the major focal point of every conversation. We think about Coinbase, Rose, you mentioned Netflix. All these things are bubbling up to like, that's talent brand's conversation, right? So that's the future of like every important conversation is part of the talent brand. And then my final recommendation for people getting into this field is have thick skin. Because when people's big decision to leave a company can be negative or positive, and you're going to have to take a lot of lumps along the way, dealing with those, with people's big life decisions. So thank you everybody for your time. I appreciate it. We'll be in touch, and everybody in the line will send out the recording, and we'll go from there. So thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.